Recorded. Okay, so once again, good evening to everyone else that has joined. I hope you're all good. So today I'm going to be discussing the assignment one. It's just a walkthrough. I'll be taking you through the assignment, guiding you along, telling you where your marks will come from, what to do, what not to do, that type of thing. So just a few housekeeping rules before we get into the actual assignment questions. Firstly, and I think I did discuss this in the previous session, that when it comes to your assignment, it's perfectly fine to handwrite them if you'd like to. I do understand that sometimes typing it up with some of the formulas, you may be unfamiliar with it on Word. So it's perfectly fine to handwrite it. Just make sure that if you are handwriting it, then you scan it, upload as a PDF, not as images, as best as you can. The problem is, although we do allow for images to be uploaded as your assignment copies, when it is taken on a specific camera and it's sort of blurred, when it is uploaded, the problem is on our side. When it goes onto the system and we are accessing it, we sometimes tend to have issues with that. So just to avoid any of those issues where you're going to have to resubmit because we couldn't see something clearly, or maybe something was cut off, that kind of thing, to avoid issues like that, just having a standard PDF document makes it easiest. There's no room for error really. And it can be, as I said, handwritten. You can take a picture of it. There's an app. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with it. It's called Cam Scanner. So I'm going to write the name of it on the screen. You possibly would have come across it before, maybe even use it all the time. So it's called Cam Scanner. It really is so useful. I literally use it every day. You can take a picture of your page where it's handwritten. It will convert it for you into, you can either do the original or you can make it black and white completely. There's also an option called Magic Color where it sort of eliminates any background writing or any other marks that you could see on the screen. And then it converts it to you individually and sorry, it converts it for you individually. So you'll convert each page as you take a picture. You can crop it, do whatever is necessary, and then it just compiles it into one document for you. So it sort of already is in your PDF format. And then you just choose the option of share PDF at the bottom of your screen, and you can just email it to yourself, save it, and upload for your assignment submission. So if you would like to handwrite it, that's perfectly fine. If you are happy to type it out, you're familiar with Word, how to enter equations and the like, then that's perfectly fine as well. I also do suggest, even if you are using Word, still convert it to a PDF document. The problem there arises where if you're using an Apple device, a lot of the time it doesn't save correctly because of the format that you are saving it in on Apple. So sometimes it saves as a document that's not opening on our side. I've had the issue many times before with students where it went through successfully on their end, but when we try to access the file, it says, well, it basically shows a blank document. So it says submission link or submission file, but when you try to open it, it doesn't open at all. So I do suggest, just to be safe, convert all of your documents, whether typed up, whether handwritten, into a PDF. That's the safest format to have it in, and you can upload like that. So that's in terms of the actual typing up or handwriting of the assignment. Then in terms of the referencing, so I've had a few emails about referencing. Generally, because most of your stats assignments are numeracy based or application based, you don't need to necessarily reference. But in this assignment, because there were a few questions, not, I mean, obviously you didn't have short questions that you needed to answer, but just to be safe and to allow for consistency across the board, I I'm going to ask that you please reference after question one. So, question one, as you know, is based on your multiple choice questions. You're matching columns A with column B. You don't have to reference every single question. Just at the end of the entire question one, you can put in that this was your reference, your textbook, dot, dot, dot. Just to be safe, I know it is numeracy. You don't actually need the reference because there are no questions where you are answering short questions and typing up long answers or whatever it is. You can just include one reference at the end of it to avoid any other issues. So your assignment is based on learning units 1 and 2. It is your basic concepts for learning unit 1, just an introductory terminology that you would have come across in the second learning unit, and then throughout your textbook as well, and throughout the remaining learning units. And then learning unit 2 was based on your index numbers. So nothing too hectic. Also, quite easy for you to gain good marks in this assignment because assignment 2 has a little bit more content. Also, still not bad. So it is easy for you to get a high enough CAS mark so that going into the exam, or just in general having a high mark entering your exam, so that you're not requiring too much out of the exam. So this assignment is really quite straightforward. It's where you're going to get majority of your marks. Remember, it is a 25% weighting. And then you have, as I said, multiple choice matching columns for question one. Question two and three are both based on your index numbers. To answer your questions, no, there doesn't need to be a specific page. It would be too many to mention because there's so many different definitions and so on. So you would possibly, I would say, just reference your textbook and maybe just give the pages, the starting page for the chapter where you have all of your theory, and the ending page. So that should be fine. You don't even actually need to indicate the pages at all. You don't need to reference your formula either. That's fine. Don't worry about that. Are there any other questions from you guys before I get started? The assignment is worth 100 marks, and it is, sorry, just highlighting. Okay, so yes, it is 100 marks, and as I said, it's based on learning units 1 and 2. Most of you would have obviously already started with it. So it is just, as I said, a walkthrough, giving you a general idea of how to go about answering mainly your practical questions. So learning unit 2, which is question 2 and 3 here. Question 1 is straightforward because it's literally just looking at a definition from your textbook and then respectively indicating your multiple choice answer and then matching your columns. So question 1 is quite straightforward. If there is anything that you specifically need to know about from question 1, please do let me know. But it's going to be a bit difficult to go through it without actually giving you answers. So what I've decided to do is just look at some of the answers that appear as options here and explain some of these to you. So a lot of them are quite repetitive, and you'll see that the same types of answers occur under each one of them. But yes, so question 1 is 50 marks. It's broken up into 30 for your multiple choice questions, and then your matching columns A with column B is 20 marks. So here's your 20 for, it's actually column X and Y, not A and B. So column X and Y, 20 marks, and then 15 multiple choice questions where each of them are 2 marks. So that's your 30 multiple choice and 20 matching columns. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through definitions, basic definitions of some of the concepts you'll find under each question. And if you have any questions along the way, please do let me know. So the first question said to you, we're looking at the time taken to complete a bicycle race. And they've given you options where, as you can see, the first part of every one of the options is either qualitative or quantitative. So qualitative and quantitative are two types of data that we commonly come across. Quantitative is data literal to the word quantitative of a numeric form. So this can be any possible number. It can be in the form of either decimals, fractions, whole numbers, integers, negative numbers, and so on. So quantitative data is further broken down into two categories. You will see two of them here as well. It is either your continuous data or it is discrete. So here they are in option 1 and 2 here. So continuous data is data that can take on any form, meaning it can be, like I mentioned just now, negative, a decimal, an integer, a fraction, any type of data. Discrete data, on the other hand, can only be whole in nature. It cannot be a decimal, a fraction, a negative. And an example of a discrete variable is, for instance, the number of people in a room. There is no such thing as 2.3 people, or a person's address is not 12.5 or 12.7 dot dot dot. So you're going to find that those numbers can only be whole in nature, whilst continuous data variables can be anything from age to a person's income to the distance traveled and so on. So these are the two categories that fall under quantitative data. And then you have qualitative data, which is literally the opposite of quantitative. It's data of a non-numeric form. And this is where you mainly have lists or categories of information. So for instance, if we look at a class list of students who are in a particular course, that would be a list of names. They are non-numeric in data, and even if you do find that there are numbers involved. So for instance, if you had a questionnaire where you had to indicate your gender, the two types of genders are male, female, and you would have, let's say, the number 0 to indicate, oh, sorry, let me use a pen. Okay, so 0 if you are female, and indicate the number 1 if you are male. So here, although there are numbers involved, those numbers don't hold any numeric value or property or any numeric meaning. They are just there to simply help you distinguish between the two categories. So discrete data, sorry, qualitative data is where you are looking at lists and categories of information where even if there are numbers involved, it's just to distinguish between the options available. So this is your difference between quantitative and qualitative. Remember, qualitative is non-numeric, quantitative is numeric, further broken down into discrete and continuous. Then you have the weakest form of data. So I'm going to sort of give you the answer to this one because I'm going to arrange these from weakest to strongest. So from weakest to strongest, the weakest form of data is your nominal, then is your ordinal, then is interval, and then is ratio. So ratio scale data is the strongest of all of these forms of data. And just a quick definition of each one of them. Nominal scale data is where you're looking at data that is qualitative in nature. So the first two, which is, and I'm going to highlight it for you, number 1 and number 2, nominal and ordinal, these are qualitative in nature. Meaning, remember we said qualitative is where the data is of a non-numeric form, ideally, and even if there are numbers involved, it is just to help you distinguish between categories. So it's mainly lists or categories of information. Nominal data is where you have lists or categories of information, where the idea is each item or each option on a list is more or less equally important. So, for instance, if we were to ask you which city you reside in, you would say either one for Johannesburg, two for Durban, three for Cape Town, four for PE, and so on. The list would continue. So, here, the idea is that there is no clear, proper, very large distinction between them. So they're more or less equal. And although there are numbers involved here, the numbers don't mean anything. It's just helping you to distinguish between or identify where a person resides. And then you have lists and categories that are non-numeric in nature as your options or your list of information. So this is nominal data. And the difference between that and ordinal is that ordinal data is also looking at lists or categories of information, but you will find that there is some sort of ranking between your values. So the best example for this is if you look at a person's size of clothing or the sizes of t-shirts or just clothing in general. So you have sizes small, medium. Sorry, I was writing and nothing was appearing. So small, medium, large, extra, extra large, and so on. Now, there's some sort of ranking in the sense that medium is bigger than small. Large is bigger than medium, extra large is bigger than large, extra large is bigger than XL, and it continues in that way. So there's some sort of ranking where each, excuse me, where each subsequent item or value or category is more or less important than the previous. So this is an example, a typical type of example with ordinal where it holds a little bit more property than your nominal. Where nominal, it's seen as being more or less equal. Ordinal will have some sort of ranking between your values. Then you have your second two, which is your interval scaled and your ratio scaled. So this falls under quantitative data. So here, your interval scaled is where you will find that, let me just write that out. So quantitative is where, and with interval and ratio, you'll find that these are numeric in nature. So with interval, the difference, and this is what separates it from ratio, is that interval does not include the number zero. So there's no number zero included in it. So for instance, in a typical survey, you may not, or you may have noticed this previously, that in most surveys, if they ask you to rate the service of a company, it would always start at the number one and work upward. So they'd say to you, indicate how happy you are with the service from a particular company from 1 to 10, where 1 is you're completely dissatisfied, and 10 with you being completely ecstatic, love their service, totally satisfied. Most surveys will start at the number one and not the number zero. So, one of the main, if not the main characteristic of your interval data is that there's no zero, there's no origin of the values that make up an interval data set. And a typical example of that is a survey where of interval data is a survey where you have a rating or some sort of um, survey that's done where you are going to rank something or give your personal opinion on something, and it is starting at the number one and moving onwards. Then you have ratio scale data, and this does include the number zero. So here it can be absolutely any number at all. It's pretty much what the definition of quantitative data is. It's where you're looking at any number from a person's income, where it could be zero, it could be um, something like a decimal, so 574.31. So there's a decimal and it goes into infinity. There's no endpoint. It can be anything at all. It can even be decimals, fractions, negative, and so on. So these are the four forms of data. You'll see that these are actually called measurement scales. If you've read through your Learning Unit 1 content in your textbook, it is four, it's under the heading of four measurement scales. And as I said, those were the definitions of each one of them. They're pretty easy to remember if you know an example of each one of them. So I would suggest maybe just jotting down the definitions I gave to you. You can listen back on it at a later stage and just writing down those short, quick one sentence definitions with an example so that you have an idea of what they are. So then you have in the next question, it says if we measure the temperature in Sutherland every day at midnight for a period of 1 year, this will generate. So let's identify what from these options we did not go through yet. So a definition we didn't come across. So we did interval scaled. We can strike that one off. We did discrete data and we did qualitative. So the only one we didn't do a definition of was your external data. So external data is literal to the word, sourced from outside an organization. So it's data that is needed for a specific purpose. It is outsourced from outside an organization because data that is needed for a specific purpose. It is outsourced from outside an organization because perhaps a company has no record or no useful information for decision making purposes from within the company and they have to look outside a company. And this is opposite to internal data. So literal to the word internal, it's just information sourced from within company databases. It's from within the organization. You do not have to outsource it. Okay, then you have at the bottom here. So again, I'm just going to strike off the ones that we did do. So we did discrete, we did internal. So these two, secondary and primary, actually also work in tandem with each other. So you have primary data versus secondary data. So primary data, literal again to the word, is where data is recorded for the first time. Now, what we mean by recorded for the first time is compared to secondary data, where data already exists in some sort of format, but it's just that it was used for another purpose. So, for instance, perhaps maybe you are now this year carrying out some sort of research on, let's just say, poverty. So, you now need some sort of information, but you firstly can either be carrying out some sort of research that is based on poverty but is a subject that hasn't been touched before. So here it would be primary data because you're going to be gathering information for the first time. It has not been researched before, so there is nothing that you can look at, no information you can get for the use of your research, which would be primary in nature. Then you are recording the information for the first time as you carry out your research. Secondary data is just where, let's just say you're still doing some sort of research on poverty, but it is part of a subject that has been researched previously. You're just building up on that. So you're going to use information that was previously recorded for another purpose and just building up on that information. So that's your difference between primary and secondary. Okay, so this on the next page, the one at the top, is not something that I can actually go through. This is something that you'll literally just have to take out of your textbook. It's looking at one of the disadvantages of your primary data. So it's just saying if you have to gather data for the first time on your own, when carrying out some sort of research, we want to know what's one of the disadvantages of that. The same with the next one. It's looking at disadvantages of your data that may be problem where it's not problem specific or where it's outdated. So that's also one that you'll have to read through on your own. The next one. Okay, so this is also to do with something one of the definitions I just gave to you. So it's looking at data that's recorded for the first time. What is it called? So we did that one already as well. And then here, so let's look at these. So this is looking at four different ones. We haven't gone through any of these definitions. So you have statistical modeling, experimentation, data relevancy, and data enrichment. So statistical modeling is where you're going to find that equations or statistical models are created to try and identify the relationship that exists between two variables. So basically, all you're trying to do here is say that if we have an entire population, and you'll see it come up when we do the calculations in Learning Unit 3. So you'll see that you have an entire population. Now let's just say that your entire population is made up of, and I'm just giving you a hypothetical situation here. So you have 50 million people that make up, or 50 million data values that make up your population. Now, at all times, if any type of research is being carried out, it might not be possible to reach all 50 million people or gather all 50 million values. So as a result, we use a subset, meaning a portion of the population, which is called the sample. So this sample is drawn from that population. So it's a representative of the population from which it is drawn. So I'm going to say here that the sample is a representative because you're drawing people or data values from the 50 million. Let's just say we draw 1,000 people. Okay, so 1,000 people is your sample. They are based on or drawn from the population of 50 million. And what we're doing in statistical modeling is we're forming equations between these two, between your sample and your population from which it was drawn. And we're trying to identify, is there a relationship or some sort of correlation between the two? So this is what statistical modeling is about. We draw relationships, we look at equations, we try and use that to forecast certain values, identify patterns, trends, relationships that exist with your data sets. Then you have experimentation. So experimentation, literal to the word, there's not much that can really be explained here, but it's also based on your sample versus your population. So experimentation is where you're looking at a data set, let's just say based on your sample, and you want to look at if we change certain values, if we literally experiment, what outcome is that going to have? So it's literal to the word experimentation. You're changing certain variables to identify how a relationship is impacted or how something changes when that specific variable is altered. Then you have data relevancy. So data relevancy, again, also one that's pretty literal to the word, is looking at the fact that when you carry out some sort of research, you need to make sure that the data is relevant to the research. So you obviously don't want to be researching one thing and have information that's completely irrelevant to it. And then the last one is your data enrichment. So again, literal to the word enrichment. It's just saying to you that you're making your data more and your information more useful, more usable, more beneficial to the end user, where you're literally enriching it. You're taking something that from a financial statement, for instance, or just something that you gathered from data, from your research, and you're enriching it. You're making it more meaningful so that it can be used effectively in the decision-making process. Okay, so that's your 4 for 1.8. Then 1.1.9, I think we've taken care of every one of these. We've looked at the definition of all of those. And then also for number 10, we've looked at definitions for all of those. Number 11. So number 11 is looking at what a sampling unit is, what a statistical model is, what an inferential statistic is, and a parameter. So a sampling unit, literal to the word, is just looking at one single value from your sample. Literal to the word sampling unit, one single unit or one single value. A statistical model is pretty much the same as what I had explained to you here under statistical modeling. So, statistical modeling is where you're creating relationships. A statistical model is where you have created an equation, identified a relationship that has existed or is existing between two variables. Then you have your inferential statistics. Now, inferential statistics leads back to what I had drawn up on the previous page. So, inferential statistics is where you have an entire population and a sample which you drew from the population. And remember, we said because you cannot get to all 50 million data values or all 50 million people, you just draw 1,000 people and you base your information on that, on those 1,000 people or those 1,000 data values. Now, when we carry out your research on the 1,000 people and whatever we gather, whatever information we gather, inferential statistics is where we generalize and we say that whatever is true for the sample is true for the entire population. So we generalize and say that what is true for the sample is more or less true for the entire population because the sample is drawn from the population. The sample is a representative of the population. So whatever's determined based on the sample should be more or less the same for the entire population. So this is what inferential statistics is about. And then a parameter, a population parameter, it's actually called a population parameter. This is where instead of calculating values or looking at statistics based on a sample, you would look at it based on the entire population. So let's just say we calculated the average income. So the mean or the average income, if we calculated it for the sample, it would be called a sample statistic. So any measure that's calculated on the sample is called a sample statistic. But if we calculated that same value, but for the population instead of the sample, it's called a population parameter. So as long as a measure or is a characteristic is based on the sample, it's called a sample statistic. If it's calculated based on the population, it's called a population parameter. Okay, so that's 1.11. 1.12 is one you'll have to read through. It's basically looking at the definition of data relevancy and what it must include. Then we went through all of those. We went through internal, external, nominal, secondary. And the last one is also one that you'll have to read through to look at what data quality is influenced by. Okay, so anything so far? Any questions that you have so far? Yes, sure. Go
Hi,
ahead.
sorry, ma'am. Just for the answer, when we're answering this, can we basically copy the information from the question paper, put into our answer paper, and then highlight the answer that we say is correct?
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Do you want it underlined or just highlighted? Or maybe
Highlighted
highlight
is
and
good.
underline, and then it's clear that this is the one we're choosing.
Yeah, that should be fine. Either one is good.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yes, you can do that as well, Ricardo. You can just, if you'd like, just label it exactly as it's labeled. So, for instance, you can just say question 1.1.1 and write down that your selection is A or B or C or D and so on. And then question 1.1.2, whatever your answer is, you'll just write it down. So you can just either write it down, you can highlight it, whichever you prefer, just write it down. So you can just either write it down, you can highlight it, whichever you prefer. However, what I do ask that you not do is write down the whole definition. So, for instance, Don't write down question 1.1.1 and then write down that the time. So, okay, let's do question 2 here since I already sort of gave you the answer to that one. So, here for question 1.1.2, don't write down that the weakest form of data is nominal scaled. Please don't write down the actual answer because it's not what they asked you for here. They did specifically say to you that in your answer paper, write down the relevant question number and the number of the response that you believe is correct. So here, nominal is number 1, which is the correct answer. Instead of writing down nominal scaled, you're just going to write down next to 1.1.2 that, sorry, not A, number 1 is your correct answer. So you'll indicate number 1. And then next to question 1.1.3, let's just say this is not the actual answer. I'm just randomly selecting here. Let's just say number 4 is your answer. You'll just indicate number 4. Please don't write out the whole word or the sentence, whatever it is. You can include a reference on after both question 1.1 and question 1.2, which is the multiple choice. But it's fine to have it after the whole question as well, because essentially this is covered in one specific chapter in your textbook or one learning unit. So it is one reference that you would indicate anyway. Okay, so most of the definitions that are actually in here as well is stuff already the stuff that I've already explained. Pretty much every one of them, I think I've already explained, or almost every one of them. I'm just trying to look through without giving you the answer. I think I've covered more or less everything. So between question 1 and 2, it should be pretty straightforward and easy to get to your answers for them. And as I said, just make sure you include your referencing at the end and do not please write out the whole sentence. You can just either put in the question number together with the correct answer, the number of the answer, or you can put in the question. You can literally copy this entire question and then just sort of highlight like I've done here. Like maybe if this is the answer, just highlight it. Okay, so let's move on to question 2. So question 2 and 3 are both based on Learning Unit 2, which is your index numbers. So from your examples we went through in our previous collab session, it should be pretty clear how to go about answering these questions. Hopefully from that you should be able to, whether you have a session, whether you're actually in my class or with Daryl or Kathy, you should be pretty comfortable with index numbers. Also, the formulas, remember, for my class, students in my class, and just in general for everyone, remember not all of the formula are in your formula sheets for your exam. So you do need to know quite a few of them. I think it's about 5 of them in total that are included in your, sorry, that are not included in your formula sheet. So you will need to know those. But naturally, your online tutor will indicate that to you. And I also will go through it again ahead of your exam, just reiterating that these are the formulas that you can expect versus the ones that are missing. So here, yes, I will do so. So I will also help you to identify where, if they don't mention, because it doesn't have to be mentioned that it's weighted or unweighted, because if it is unweighted, they will specifically say to you that it's unweighted. So I will explain that to you as we look at the question as well. Okay, so Learning Unit 2 covers question 2 and 3. The first question is worth 25 marks. Actually, both of them are worth 25. And it says to you that the following table indicates the unit prices in rands and quantities of 3 intermediate products consumed by a car factory in dispatch for the month of Feb and April 2023. So here you have, and remember, always when it comes to your index numbers, the earlier period is going to be your base period, the latter will be your current. So naturally, although they have actually said that to you in the values, I will also write it here that February is the earlier month, that would be the base period. April is the latter, so it would be the current. So naturally, that would make, and as I said, it is included here already, it would make the price and quantity for the base period P0 and Q0. For the current period, it would be P1 and Q1. So they've given you that, which is quite easy then. It becomes a lot easier once you know and you don't have to work through or identify which is which. But even identifying it is pretty straightforward. Just look at which is the earlier period, which is the later period. Earlier is base, the later period or the latter period is your current. And so automatically the base becomes P0, Q0, the latter becomes P1, Q1, your current period. So here they have the three items, the price and quantity, respectively, for the base period and the current period. Question one asked you to use February 2023 as the base period and compute the quantity relatives in April 2023 for wheels and cable ties. So please pay attention to firstly the fact that they only asked you to calculate this for two items. From the table, it's wheels and cable ties. So you are not calculating it for mirrors. You can basically completely ignore the information for that one for this first question. So then you're looking at, that's the first thing we identified. The second thing we identified is that they asked you to calculate the quantity relative. Now, firstly, if you look at the wording of this, another word for relatives is index numbers or indices. So to calculate the quantity indices is saying to you, you are calculating one single quantity index. It is not an unweighted, it is not a weighted either. It's just a single quantity index. So as long as they don't specifically say the words weighted or unweighted, or they don't mention, like they did here, Pasha and Las Vegas, as long as it doesn't mention those four words. They don't say weighted, they don't say unweighted, they also don't say Las Vegas or Pasha. They just say quantity relatives or quantity indices, or they could say price relatives or price indices. As long as they're saying that, it indicates to you that it's for a single item at a time, meaning you will work out the quantity relative in this question for wheels first, then you will work it out for cable ties. So you're doing them individually. You're doing them for one single item at a time. So this then is calculated as, remember your quantity relative formula for one single item is Q1 over Q0 multiplied by 100. So basically when you're answering this, the mark allocation is 10 marks, so it would be 5 per item. You would need to indicate that you're first calculating it for wheels, and this is a general idea of how you'll write out these answers or type up these answers. You'll indicate that for wheels, this is the respective values for Q1 and Q0. Naturally, you'll have to look at the table here, identify what Q1 is for wheels, what Q0 is. You'll put them over each other. I'm just going to say XXX for the price, sorry, for the quantity for each one. So this is Q1, this is Q0, multiply it by 100. And please do not convert this to do not show this as a percentage. Yes, it is a percentage because we're multiplying by 100, but you do not need to show that percentage sign here. So when you get to this answer, let's just suppose hypothetically, this ends up being 165.2 So this is just a random figure. So if this ends up being your answer, please don't include the percentage sign. You are not doing this because at this stage, you are simply indicating an index number. You are not indicating the percentage by which it increased or decreased. So please leave out the percentage sign. You will leave the answer exactly as it is here. As you can see, 165 point percentage sign. You will leave the answer exactly as it is here. As you can see, 165.27, and that would be it. Only, and remember here, again, very important, another thing that needed to be noted is that they asked you to interpret your answer. So whether or not they ask you to interpret, just as a habit, make sure that you do interpret because there are almost always marks allocated to interpreting for these index numbers because you do need to indicate that there was a percentage increase or decrease. So here, when you're interpreting, you will then compare that value to 100. Remember, if it's greater than 100, it would have indicated an increase. If it's less than 100, so if it's greater than 100, it was an increase. If it's less than 100, it would have been a decrease. So if you get a figure that's higher than 100, like here, I just gave you this random example, the difference between that and 100 is 65.27. And here you'll put in the percentage and you'll say the quantity consumed or the quantity sold, whatever it is, of wheels. So here it was products consumed by a car factory. So you'll say the quantity consumed of wheels between between the months February 2023 and April 2023 increased by the 65.27%. So as long as it is higher than no. So always for stats 2 decimal places unless they specify otherwise. Never ever 1 decimal place. So please leave it as 2 decimal places, even if it's like a 95 point, for example, let's just say it was 95.70. Although it's a zero, make sure you write down the zero. So always 2 decimal places. So here, as I said, compare to 100 when you are interpreting. Work out the difference between the figure and 100. If it's greater than 100, it's an increase. If it's less than 100, it's a decrease. And then in your interpretation, you will state that between this period and this period, there was a so many percent increase or a so many percent decrease. So 65.077 would be 65.08. You will round up on the normal, yes, so you'll round up on the normal 5 and greater than rule. If it's 5 or greater than 5, it'll be rounded up. Okay, so that is question 1, your quantity, no stress. Yeah, so your quantity relative was the first one. Then you have the next one saying to you to calculate the partial price index for all of the products for April 2023, and again, interpret your answer. So here, your partial price index is firstly your weighted. It doesn't need to say weighted because it's a given that it is weighted if it's a partial or a last periods method. So here it is for all of the products and the formula for your partial price index. And this is one that I'm just trying, yes, so this should be included in your formula sheet for your exam. So remember, it is always P times Q. So with your partial price index, remember you're holding quantity constant. Although you don't need to know the whole explanation of this, I'm just explaining it to you so you have a general behind the scenes idea. So you're holding your other variable constant, that's your price. So, sorry, your quantity, because you're calculating price, you'll hold quantity constant at its current level, and it will be P1 and P0 here. So this is your formula for your partial price index. You just need to know the formula. No explanations necessary in terms of why it's this formula. So it says to you the sum of P1 times Q0 in your numerator, in your denominator, it's P0 times Q1. Now, please pay attention to the fact that it's the sum of, because many people do this the wrong way, where they do P1 times Q0, the numerator here. They do this part individually. So basically, P1 times Q0. Here's P1, P1 times Q1. Here's P1, here's Q1. They would say this times this, then they would say this times this, and then this times this, and they would do the same for the denominator. So this is P0 times Q1. So here's P0. Let me just erase here. So here's P0 and Q1. And then the next one is that P0 and that Q1 and that P0 and that Q1, and they would divide them individually. So for instance, for the first item, mirrors, mistakenly they would say P1 times Q1 in the numerator. So they'll say 135.7 times 4135. And then immediately in the denominator, they would go P0 times Q1. So 133.7 times Q1 of 4135. This is not the correct method. You are not doing them individually, you are doing them collectively. This is why it is one fraction with the sum of sign at the beginning of it. So please do not work it out individually. I'm showing you that because I want you to be able to identify that that is not how you're going to do it. You're not going to do it individually. You're going to literally write it out exactly the way you see here, meaning you're going to draw one big division line, one big fraction line, and you're going to do the P1 times Q1 for each item and sum it up, just like the formula says. So for instance, and I'm just going to show you the first part of it. So P1 times Q1 for your numerator is, here's P1, here's Q1. So it's going to be 135.7 times 4135. So that's 135.7 times 4135 plus the next item is 1029.4 times 8810. And then you're going to add on the last item, 810. And then you're going to add on the last item. The price P1 is 32.5 times 71. So you see that you've done it for all of the items in one numerator, where you've taken the P1 times the Q1 for the first item, plus the P1 times Q1 for the second item, plus the P1 times Q1 for the third item. And you simply added each of those up. So for the denominator, you'll do exactly the same thing, and that then you can type in that whole thing into your calculator. It should allow you to do the whole thing, and that will give you your final answer. So once again, even here, your final answer, please don't leave it as a percentage. Just put in the answer that you get from the calculator only when you are interpreting, compare to 100 and say that there was either a percentage increase or a percentage decrease, and the amount, as I said, that it has increased or decreased by. Okay, so that is your question 2.2. Now let's look at 2.3. So here they said to you, again, using Feb 2023 as your base period, compute the last period's price index for all of the products for 2023 April and interpret your answer. So again, here it's one formula that's used. You'll do everything in the formula itself. You don't have to do anything individually. You can literally just write out one big fraction and calculate your numerator, your denominator, put that whole thing into the calculator, and it will give you your final answer. So here, your formula for your price index, your last period price index is P1 times Q0 in your numerator, and then in your denominator, it's the sum of P0 times Q0. And then again, just do all of it in your numerator. So for the first item, you'll do the P1 times the Q0. So those two, plus you'll add on the next items, P1 times Q0, and you'll continue in that manner. So again, when you get to the end of it, leave your answer as is, compare it to 100. If it's higher, it's a percentage increase. If it's lower, it's a percentage decrease. Work out the difference between them and interpret by saying whatever your whole interpretation is between this period and this period on average. This is an increase, the decrease, and so on. All right, so that's question 2. And then question 3 is pretty much the same thing. So question 3 is also based on 3 items. They've given you price and quantity. Here, the periods are 2022 and 2023. So 2022 is naturally the earlier of the years. That will be your base, which was indicated by the P0 and the Q0. And they also told you that that was the base year. And then the current year is 2023 because that's the latter between the 2 years, and that would be P1 and Q1. So they said to you in question 1 here, again, very carefully, let's read through what they say to you. They said using 2022, you would need to using 2022 as a base year, you would need to compute the price relatives in 2023 for eggs and sesame seeds. So firstly, you're only doing it for 2 items. You're only calculating the price relative for eggs and sesame seeds. So not the flour. You can completely ignore it for that question. And you are calculating a price relative. So a price relative, again, is just another way of saying price index or price indices. And it's just saying to you, you're calculating it for one single item at a time. So a price relative is calculated as P1 over P0 multiplied by 100. So you're going to calculate P1 over P0 for eggs, and then you're going to calculate P1 over P0 times 100 for sesame seeds, and whatever answers you get, again, compared to 100. If it's higher, it's an increase. If it's lower, it's a decrease, and interpret. So for your actual answer, it won't be a percentage. Only in your interpretation will you say that there was a percentage increase or decrease, dot, dot, dot. All right, then the next one is your last pairs. They say to you again, using 2022 as a base year, compute the last pairs price index for all of the goods for 2023, so all of the goods, and interpret your answer. Once again, here you're doing this as one fraction. So the last pairs price index will say to you, it's P0 times Q1 in your numerator over P0 times Q0 in your denominator. So here you're looking at the price index. Oh, sorry, I actually wrote that down incorrectly. So here it is a price index. So you're holding your quantity constant. So your quantity constant is at its base because it's a last pairs method. So it would be in your numerator, P1 times Q0 over in your denominator P0 times Q0. So again here, do it as one whole fraction. So P0 times Q0 for your numerator. Here's P1 times Q0, P1, Q0. So each of these are done. So 2.85 times 2550 plus, again, all in one numerator, 64 times 109 plus the 1185 times 118.5 times 345. So this is your numerator. Your denominator is P0 times Q0. And then one fraction, put it into your calculator exactly as that, and then exactly the same. Leave it as is for your answer, compare to 100 for your interpretation, look at whether it's higher or lower to indicate an increase or decrease, and interpret, remember, from one period to the next whether there was on average an increase or decrease in the prices of the goods in this basket. And then the last one was your partial price index. So your partial price index is almost the same. So with your partial price index, you are holding you're looking at a price index, so you're holding quantity constant, but it's at its current level. So it'll be P1 times Q1 in your numerator, the sum of it, and then in your denominator, so it'll be P1 times Q1 in your numerator, the sum of it, and then in your denominator, it's P0 times Q1. So exactly the same thing, everything in one in your numerator. So all of the P1 times Q1. Also, another mistake that people tend to make is where it says the sum of, they are assuming that you'll sum up all the P1. So mistakenly, they would look at P1 and they'll sum these up. So they'll basically say 2.85 plus 64 plus 118.5, and then they'll say this is multiplied by, because it says multiplication here, they'll multiply by the sum of Q1. So they'll go to the table and they would look at all of the Q1 in this column and they would add up those mistakenly and say 27 plus 103 plus 395. Please note it is not this. You are doing P1 times Q1 for each individual item, and then you are summing it up. So please make note of that. It's going to be for every item in the basket, but each one will have P1 times Q1 done for itself. So for example, first one, P1 times Q1, done. Plus next one, P1 times Q1, done. Plus next one, P1 times Q1, done. And that's your numerator. So please make note of that. It is going to be done as one fraction at the top, each individual items P1 times Q1, in the denominator, each individual items P0 times Q1. Okay, so that is it for the NSS session. How would we reference? You don't need to reference your calculations. It's only that theory bit that you have to worry about. Okay, are there any other questions from anyone else?
Thank you. We'll try complete it by the end of this weekend, and then we'll probably ask you should we get stuck.
Sure, not a problem. Yes, so you're going to do each one individually, like I showed you just now. You will do each item's P1 times Q1 plus the next item's P1 times Q1 plus the next item's P1 times Q1. That's your numerator. And then in your denominator, obviously exactly the same thing, but it would be, so for this one that we were just doing, the partial, in your denominator, it was P0 times Q1. So it would have been P0 times Q1 for the first item, plus for the next item, P0 times Q1, and so on. All right, so if there are no other questions, I will end off for today. If you do have any questions, please email myself if I'm your online tutor, or if you are in another class or another group, please email your respective online tutors. And all of the best for your assignment. I will be in touch with my group soon. I will also send this recording to the other online tutors and they will make it available to you as well. Sorry, guys, I got cut off there. Are you able to hear me? Okay, perfect. So yes, I will. I'm not sure if it got cut off, but I said that I will be sending this recording to the other online tutors. They will make it available to you. Also, for anyone else that didn't attend, please let them know that there is this available recording and it should be distributed to you guys by your online tutors as soon as possible. All of the best with your assignment, and I will see the rest of you for the next one. And for my class, I will be in touch soon. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers.